I'm Donald and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And here we are, a little bit of a late video because I was waiting for the BAFTA reactions and the award shows to finish and then get my sort of thoughts and analysis and really sort of just get a good night's sleep over it. So this is the sort of final big award show because next week I'm going to be giving my final Oscar predictions, and then that's when the Oscars happen. Of course, once the Oscars actually happen, I'm going to give my thoughts on the show. So my predictions will be later in the week, and then my thoughts on the show. So I'm thinking right now maybe Saturday, maybe Friday would be the sort of release of the predictions video. And then of course I'm going to react to the Oscars once they actually happen. And then I'm going to be doing actually a new series called The Top 10 of the 2010s, of which, so for the next 8 months until the next Oscar season, I'm going to be talking about some of the best movies of the decade in different genres and sort of break it down and sort of go from like 10 to 1 throughout the weeks. So different genres, things like romance, action, adventure, sci-fi, and eventually ultimately going with my top 10 of the decade later on, but really sort of talking about films that I've appreciated throughout the decade. Not Oscar content, but always sort of in the second half, more of my film analysis side. So I hope you stay tuned for that. But right now we're in the thick of it. The BAFTAs just happened, so let's just jump into that on my thoughts and reactions. So the winner for Best Film was 1917. Now, in recent years, the BAFTAs, in terms of predicting Best Picture, have actually been a little bit disappointing. Now, the only reason I say that is because recently, the Best Film at the BAFTAs haven't really been predicting the Oscars. This is because the preferential ballot of the Oscars, which is different than what the BAFTAs use, they just use sort of the traditional 5 nominees, predict the winner versus the preferential ballot, which is a whole complicated system where you have to rank your choices, and then, of course, for the Oscars this year, a potential 10, but of course they only choose 8 or 9 this year. Of course, 9 nominees. So even though 1917 winning this, and it's maybe not the best of news because BAFTA has been doing that well, it's still good news. And especially going into the Oscars night, it is without a doubt the front runner. Just looking at all the guilds and the numbers and what it's been winning PGA, winning DGA, winning BAFTAs, getting a lot of awards at BAFTA, that just has a lot of support for a film. Now, not to say 1917 is a lock, that's not to say the movie is definitely going to win Best Picture, but it has a very good chance with the strongest sort of backing behind it being really that PGA win, being that a PGA which uses the preferential ballot. It won that award, which shows the sort of strength of this kind of movie. Now, can a movie like Parasite win? Absolutely. It did very well here at the BAFTAs. I'll go through it later in terms of its possibility to win, and I wouldn't begrudge you if you pick something like Parasite, but I don't think it's as much as a 2-horse race as some people think. I think based on the stats, based on what we sort of have seen, 1917 has a lot of oddities. That's true. It doesn't have that screenplay support, which has been historically more accurate in these recent years since the preferential ballot. Oftentimes the director and the picture haven't been lining up as well. But still, there's still a traditional path that has happened in recent years. I'm looking at something like The Shape of Water, where it gets its couple of tech nominations and then gets director and picture. Now, it doesn't have that acting support, but it was sort of broken late, so we don't know if the actors really like it or necessarily dislike it in that sense. But essentially going to the Oscars, with this win, 1917 is the clear front runner. It has a lot going for it in terms of you picking it for Best Picture. That's not to say something like a Parasite or even potentially Once Upon a Time in Hollywood can't win, but right now I think it's less of a sort of 50-50 between Parasite and 1917 and more of a 70-30 between 1917 and Parasite. Best Director, this one seems to be a little bit pretty much locked up for me because the award also went to Sam Mendes, who has the sort of most stunning directorial achievement of the year, you could say, in terms of the if you treat directing as a technical award in a lot of ways, which is how it's sort of been coming, whether it be someone like Alejandro Iñárritu with The Revenant or Damien Chazelle for La La Land, the sort of technical craft that's able to put into the film and the different struggles that it took to actually make this film. And of course 1917 with the long takes and the sort of coordination was something unique and that we haven't really seen on this huge scale ever done before. He won the DGA, which has been so historically accurate, especially in this decade. Almost all of the DGA winners that won DGA ultimately win Best Director at the Oscars. He wins here. It's pretty much a lock in my opinion that Sam Mendes is going to win for Best Director. Best Original Screenplay, which surprisingly I think went to Parasite. Now Parasite, the screenplay, has really sort of been building a lot of momentum. I think people thought were a little bit hopeful that Bong Joon-ho was going to win for Best Director, but now that seems to be Sam Mendes' race and sort of it's all locked up. people I think are maybe showing their support for Bong Joon-ho, someone who they very like, someone who's been campaigning very hard for this movie. Of course, they love his movie. And they want to sort of give him an award. They want to give him something. So oftentimes now we're seeing it given to him for the screenplay. Now the Writers Guild, he just won recently for Best Original Screenplay, along with this co-writer, Joon-ho, I believe his name. They won for Best Original Screenplay at the WGAs. Now that's not necessarily a huge achievement because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I would argue its main competitor wasn't even nominated there because Quentin Tarantino and his script didn't qualify sort of the Writers Guild standards, and they've never been necessarily even historically accurate at predicting the Oscar winners. But winning at BAFTA here, beating out Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think is really crucial. I think the mentality they're trying to build is that, well, we want to give Bong Joon-ho something. We want to give him an award. Quentin Tarantino has already gotten 2 screenplay Oscars. Do we really want to give it to him a third? I think that's maybe a sentiment that people think, oh, I like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood a lot. Tarantino's a writer. He's one of the best writers of all time. They'll give him that. But I think a lot of people are saying, Bong Joon-ho, he's the cool kid in town. He's new. He's delivered an amazing screenplay. Maybe we want to give it to him. And sort of the sentiments are shifting with that WGA win, and especially with this BAFTA win. I think so strong signs for Parasite, but that doesn't mean it's a locked race yet. I still think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood could win, and I may be even predicting that come Oscar night. I'm still sort of going back and forth because I think a lot of people, especially, the American audience, see Tarantino as a writer, and they do like this movie a lot. But really what this shows for Parasite is actually strength for Best Picture, because oftentimes Best Picture in these more recent years have been lining up with Screenplay. Spotlight wins Screenplay and Picture. Moonlight wins Screenplay, actor, Best Supporting Actor in Picture. Green Book wins Screenplay. There's sort of a more of a direct connection than, say, the connection between Best Director and Best Picture in the past. So if Parasite wins here at Best Original Screenplay, then maybe it gets a Best Editing win. And then maybe, it wins for Best Picture. I mean, that's actually a really sort of good path for that kind of a movie. And one SAG has the ensemble win. The fact that I'm a little bit hesitant about is that, will really people reward that screenplay, even though it's in foreign film? In one way, you're reading the text, so you actually sort of are thinking about the text and the words and dialogue more than you're even thinking about, 1917 screenplay, for example. But it's still foreign film. There's still that sort of disconnect. The humor doesn't maybe work to the greatest effect that, say, something like a Tarantino does because of how he uses rhythm and the language, of course, that most of the Oscar members speak. It's going to be really a toss-up, but Parasite has sort of threw a wrench into this Best Original Screenplay race, and right now I think it's maybe the front runner in this race, but it's still a toss-up in my opinion. Then we had Best Adapted Screenplay, which went to Jojo Rabbit. Now, I think a lot of people, and pundits and other people, were really predicting Little Women, but if you notice in my past couple of videos, I talked about my hesitance to Little Women, that all of a sudden, some people just decided, oh, they want to give Greta Gerwig an Oscar, therefore it's going to go to Little Women, which didn't make a lot of sense to me. It was sort of not using the stats, not using the basis, just saying that, oh, they like her, it's her time, they like Little Women, which is all true, but Little Women's success was getting the amount of nominations it did. Jojo Rabbit's a movie that's sort of been staying around throughout the season, and I always thought it would be Jojo Rabbit, and now with Jojo Rabbit beating out Little Women at the WGAs and at BAFTAs, I think Taika Waititi is going to win here as well. Let's also not forget, he was nominated at the DGA for his directing. This is a movie that they like a lot. This is the TIFF People's Choice winner. It's a movie that got a lot of six nominations. It got the tech, it got the acting, and it got screenplay, and of course picture. And I think that they want to reward it with something, and one of the sort of higher up categories, and I think that's similar happening to Parasite, where they don't want to just give Parasite Best International Feature because they like it so much. They want to give it a high award like a screenplay. I think something similar to would happen with Jojo Rabbit, where they don't want to get. They probably would go home empty-handed unless maybe a Scarlett Johansson upset or a costume design upset. If it weren't for the screenplay, I think the screenplay is sort of a perfect chance to give it this heartwarming movie, this funny movie, which is, screenplays that always do well here. These sort of win. People still think it's a three-way race. I've never been super confident in Little Women. I think that's a narrative that's been built, but is that actually true? How the voters look at how the voters have been voting, and they've been voting for Jojo Rabbit. Then we have the 4 acting races, which have kind of been really boring this season. Once again, Renée Zellweger for Judy, Joaquin Phoenix for Joker, Brad Pitt for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and Laura Dern for Marriage Story were the 4 winners, and I expect that to become Oscar night. Are there always can there be surprises? Yes, there's always some sort of surprise. Even in the acting categories, the Oscars will do their own thing and go their own way. But certain years, like a couple years ago, the 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri year, the 4 stayed throughout the whole season since the Golden Globes, and those were the 4 that won. I'm still probably going to pick the 4 just because they've won literally everything, BAFTA, SAG, Golden Globes, every chance they've gotten. The only sort of surprise category I would say would either be in Best Supporting Actress or Best Actress, where I think because Scarlett Johansson was a dual nominee, she could maybe surprise for Best Supporting Actress for Jojo Rabbit, or maybe she surprises for Best Lead Actress for Marriage Story. My sort of dilemma is that I think her Marriage Story performance is not super likable, maybe enough to beat Renée Zellweger, who I think is actually beatable this year, and I think her Jojo Rabbit performance, which I think is a little bit more traditional Oscar from a movie they really well like, is going up against sort of the legendary status of Laura Dern in a great performance, and this may be the only award that goes to Marriage Story, which is a movie they like. It seems to be sort of locked up with these 4, and that's probably what I'm going to be predicting come Oscar night. Then we have Best Score, which is kind of a narrative that caught me off guard this year, but does make a lot of sense in hindsight, and which is ultimately what I'm going to do for probably the Oscar night, which is go to Joker, which is done by Hilda Gundeter for Best Score. This is a movie that they really liked. It got 11 nominations, and it's most likely going to get Joaquin Phoenix for Joker, but it got a lot of those tech nominations, so they still want to give it maybe another award because it was so well liked throughout the Academy. And I think that I was sort of convinced that was 1917 because it was Thomas Newman's year, but that narrative hasn't really built. It's also notable that on the tech categories, on the ballots, their names don't appear, so you can't just vote for your friends. Another trend I'm also seeing is that, and I've mentioned this before, is that oftentimes there's the same amount of guys who get nominated. Thomas Newman's got nominated 15 times. John Williams is like 50, 52 or something. Alexandre Desplat has been nominated a lot recently. And these 3 guys all got nominated this year, but oftentimes the winner actually goes to the newcomer, Justin Hurwitz for La La Land. Last year, Ludwig Göransson for Black Panther. A few years before that, Stephen Price for Gravity. So it is, sort of the newcomer. Even Alexandre Desplat, who's been nominated a lot, finally won, I believe, for the Grand Budapest Hotel. So, there hasn't been sort of a narrative that Thomas Newman deserves to win. I mean, that's still a possibility because he has been nominated so many times. He is so well respected. 1917 is a movie that if you believe in sort of a sweep where it wins every category it's nominated for, this could sort of come in with it. But my problem is I don't think it has a recognizable enough theme. It's sort of just a big, grand, sweeping score that makes you feel things, but you're not sort of humming its tunes necessarily that maybe you're doing for Joker in that bathroom scene and the sort of incredible cello bass work that Hilda did on this film. And her winning here, her winning at the Globes, I think that she's the sort of newcomer that everyone's really interested in. Joker's a movie they really well liked. I think ultimately, even though I wasn't 100% sure about this narrative, it sort of has formalized that it seems to be Joker winning for Best Score. Best Cinematography, you have 1917, Roger Deakins. It's pretty much going to be him, what he did, the long takes, so technically impressive. He won just a couple of years before Blade Runner 2049. That's not uncommon for the Cinematography Guild to reward, people in multiple years in a row, something like a Emmanuel Lubezki or a John Toll even. So this is something that's happened before, and I very well expect this to be sort of the lock of the night. 1917 is going to win Best Cinematography. Best Editing went to Ford v Ferrari, which was as expected, in my tech categories video where I gave my DGA reactions and my tech categories. Check out that video for in-depth information on some of the tech categories and the landscapes. I talked about how it was really going to go to Parasite or Ford v Ferrari because Parasite won the Ace Eddie Awards, but Parasite wasn't nominated here, so Ford v Ferrari was probably going to win the BAFTA. It did, so now we don't have a lot of clarification going into it. If you believe in a movie like Parasite maybe winning Best Picture, I think you're predicting it here. If you don't think it's going to win Best Picture, or maybe you're not 100% confident in it, and you think, for example, like I do, which is Ford v Ferrari is a movie they like, they want to give it something, I think it's going to go to Best Ford v Ferrari for Best Editing. It also has the most amount of editing, which I think is just the most recognizable to a lot of people, with something like a Bohemian Rhapsody or even a Hacksaw Ridge, where the most amount of editing often does win. And I think Ford v Ferrari has the most editing, at least compared to Parasite. Best Production Design, another interesting category, one of the most interesting categories I think going into Oscar night, because I think this is a ripe for an upset, but also a little bit confusing as to who the frontrunner is. The winner here at the BAFTAs was 1917, which was not surprising. I think the sort of two frontrunners are 1917 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but the problem was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood won the Best Art Directors Guild. So while I think Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is kind of maybe a little bit more obvious because of the recreated, period type aspects, 1917 has incredible production design when you think of all the different areas, the sort of the town that they go to, the trenches, and oftentimes the production designer and how the whole layout of the movie was designed is often appreciated to that movie. Ultimately, my sort of judgment of this category is looking back on previous winners is that it's not necessarily even the best designed movie. Oftentimes it's just a movie that's really well liked and really well liked for its technical abilities. That's crucial. Whether it be a Black Panther, whether it be a Shape of Water, these are movies that they liked, but also like their technical ability. So if you believe in a Shape of Water-esque narrative where Shape of Water won PGA, Shape of Water won DGA, and then it's good. And then what happened? It won Best Production Design, Best Score, Best Director, and Best Picture. This could happen for 1917. If it wins early on for Best Production Design, I think it has a strong chance of winning for Best Picture because it wins, production design and then director and then cinematography and then a couple sounds and then picture, and that's sort of a really great path for it to win. But right now I think 1917 is a little bit more liked than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's going up while Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is going down. I think it's going to surpass it here and probably go to it here, but it's still sort of very up in the air, and maybe a surprise happens, like if Parasite Love is there and we see something for Best Production Design, go to Parasite. Then we have Best Costume Design, went to Little Women, as expected. It wasn't nominated for the Costume Designers Guild. Surprisingly, Jojo Rabbit won there, which wasn't super surprising to me. I thought it was either going to be Once Upon a Time in Hollywood or Jojo Rabbit. It went to Jojo Rabbit. I wouldn't begrudge you if you were to picking it here, but I think Little Women is still a movie they liked. It has the most obvious costumes in terms of these sort of traditional big period pieces. Out of all the costume designers nominated, Jacqueline Duran is the most accomplished. She's won a couple times, or maybe just once, and she's been nominated many times as well, so they sort of like her, and it's not uncommon for a legendary costume designer just to win, whether it be Sandy Powell or Colleen Atwood, just to win here. And I think Little Woman has the sort of most obvious amount of costumes and things like that. It also was nominated for Best Picture. I think Little Woman's going to get this award here, and winning BAFTA here sort of confirms my opinion of that. Best Makeup and Hair, Bombshell won here, which is sort of another predictable winner that we thought is going to happen. It's almost a lock in a lot of ways too. Watch Bombshell win here for sure. Best Sound, another one I think is kind of locked up, which went to 1917. Now, there always could be a split between Best Sound Editing and Best Sound Mixing, which has happened at the Oscars, but oftentimes they do overlap. Oftentimes a Best Picture nominee that's a war movie will win both these categories, or at very least one of them, whether it be Dunkirk, whether it be Hacksaw Ridge, whether it be American Sniper. They often get at least one of these awards, and I think 1917, if you're a Best Picture believer, if you think this can even win Best Picture, it should win both these sound categories pretty easily. Best Visual Effects, which I think is going to be the most interesting category come Oscar night. We haven't really seen a lot of comparables to this in the more recent years, where there are only 2 Best Picture nominees. Oftentimes, if there's one Best Picture nominee, it wins, and then if there's no Best Picture nominees, the most like Best Picture nominee will win, something like A First Man or Interstellar. But this year, there's 2 Best Picture nominees, and the winner, he went to 1917. So maybe you think, okay, that's a Best Picture nominee, they really like it. If you believe in the sweep, the visual effects, okay, it's going to go to 1917. But my issue would be that there's also The Irishman, and do they want The Irishman to go home empty-handed? I think maybe that could happen, but probably not. I think they'd still like this movie. I think they're impressed by the visual effects, and that's a large of the sell of the movie. Everything you talk about The Irishman has to do with that de-aging technology. It's also notable that The Irishman won for Best Supporting Visual Effects, beating out 1917 at the Visual Effects Society Awards. I think The Irishman just has a little bit more noticeable. I think that 1917 is going to be winning a lot of other categories, but we rarely ever see sort of massive sweeps like we did, in the Lawrence of Arabia sort of days, or even something like Return of the King. They do like to spread it around a little bit more. They do. The recent Best Picture winners have only been winning 4 or 5 awards, so maybe so I'm thinking about some of the categories 1917 can say lose, and I'm thinking about score, and I think visual effects. I don't think a lot of people are predicting The Irishman. I think this is a wide open case, and maybe if you're betting money or something, this would be probably the best odds. But I think The Irishman still has a good chance, but there's still a spoiler of something like The Lion King as well, which also did well at the Visual Effects Society. Best Film non the English language. This went to Parasite, which is a absolute lock. It's going to win here. I'd be shocked if it didn't. Actually, I think if it doesn't win here early on, it actually may win Best Picture. That may be a good sign for it, but it's most likely going to win here, and that'll be sort of its big, maybe award of the night where Bong Joon-ho actually gets on, or maybe he gets on for Best Original Screenplay, and then he maybe gets on for Best Picture. But I think this is absolutely a lock for Parasite. And then Best Documentary, a little bit of a surprise win here, going with For Sama. Now, not that much of a surprise, because this was also nominated for Best Film Non-English Language, where it wasn't at the Oscars, so they felt like maybe they wanted to reward it with something. Now, this makes a little bit more sense because, this is a Syrian refugee movie, and the British being, English being in the UK and being in Europe, they have that connection, whereas something like Americans don't have as much of a connection to that, but they do have more of a connection to, say, something like American Factory, where that has sort of impacted a lot of the communities and maybe people they know, where BAFTA, where the British people didn't have that sort of issue. So it's going to be sort of up to what you believe is going to sort of win in terms of which will connect to the most amount of people, which is why I'm probably going to go with something like American Factory, even though it didn't win here, even though you only got the DGA, which hasn't been super accurate recently. I still think that it has a sort of the Eastern aspect and the Western aspect, has the American aspect, has the Chinese aspect, so it appeals to some of the more Asian international voters. It appeals, of course, to the Americans. I think it's sort of a political issue movie, which is won recently, whether it be something like Icarus, another Netflix movie. And so Netflix also behind it here, and I think it sort of can use its power and establishment in the documentary game to push American Factory over the edge and give it the win, even though it didn't win here. But For Sama is still, a possibility, and this win here actually shows some strength for it. And then finally, Best Animated Feature, it went to Klaus, or Klaus. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but we'll say it's Klaus, like Santa Claus. Now this is a little bit of a surprise contender. I wasn't, I didn't even predict it to get nominated, because Christmas movies in the past haven't ever got nominated, really, whether it be Grinch or even things like that. But yet, Klaus has been doing excellent this year, winning here at BAFTAs, of course, getting nominated at the Globes, I believe. Or also the big sort of win was its domination at the Annie Awards, where it won pretty much every category it was nominated in, where something like a Toy Story 4 got left to the side. Now, I've always been a factor that Pixar movies do very well here, and they almost always do very well at the Oscars, especially when they're nominated. However, I don't think Toy Story 4 is going to win here. The previous movie, Toy Story 3, won. That was actually the only sequel ever to win Best Animated Feature. Almost all the time they go with original film. So it would be odd for another sequel to win, especially since the past sequel, Toy Story 3, also won. So I think they're a branch that really appreciates and values originality. And I think a lot of people will also connect to that, whether it be Inside Out or Coco. These are Pixar movies, but they're also original movies. They're first movies. They're not sequels, which is a reason why maybe Frozen 2 didn't even get nominated. So I think that Klaus, with his BAFTA win, with his domination at Annie's, puts it in a nice slot of being 2D animated, which really appeals to the animators. Maybe a good Christmas movie that you watch for the kids, which appeals to more of the broader sense. It's also a Netflix movie, which I'm sure they've been pushing hard. Of course, they also got that nomination for I Lost My Body, but it's not as weird as I Lost My Body. So I think that Klaus, with that sort of unique 2D animation, will put Netflix's animation really on the big time with that Best Animated Feature win. And I think right now, with that BAFTA win, sort of solidifies his chances. Even though you could say, make an argument for Toy Story, but the sequel factor, I think, is really hurting it right now. That's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope you appreciated my reactions and my thoughts on the BAFTAs. Of course, stay tuned to either Friday or Saturday. I'm not sure where I'm going to release a video. Most likely Saturday of my predictions of the Oscars, probably early on in the morning and Saturday. So, you have a full sort of time to hear my thoughts and then make your own thoughts before of course, the inevitable Sunday Oscars, and then I'll react to them. And like I said at the top of the show, also going to be starting a new series after that. So subscribe to the channel, stay tuned. I appreciate all your support. Let me know some of your thoughts of the BAFTAs. This sort of put a couple of wrenches in a couple of the categories, which make things unique, but maybe make you overthink some things as well. So try to sort of parse it, try to parse the facts. Don't just do sort of narratives that you sort of have thought about or you really want it, and vote with your heart. I mean, sometimes that's fun, but really, if you want to do well, if you want to do the statistical in terms of the amount of correct nominations, you want to look at the numbers, you want to look at the guilds, you want to look at the previous nominations, and you want to look at my advice, which is why you're watching this video. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, stay tuned.